Welcome to the Capital News. I'm your host, Alex Karitis. Today is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining me. The title of today's podcast, Powell and Biden Speak, $1 Trillion Giveaways. This is putting Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, Bob Barker, Drew Carey, Wheel of Fortune, putting all of these people and game show hosts to shame. They can't hold a candle to what our government and what our central bank has done and wants to continue to do. You think you want a new car on The Price is Right? This is nothing. This is nothing. Joe Biden, the Democrats, they want to give you a car. And Jay Powell and company at the Fed, they want to finance it. Whatever you want, you're going to get it. Because they just want to give, because they're so generous. They are so nice and they care so deeply about you and your families. Of course, these people do not care about you. And I have 28 trillion pieces of evidence in my corner, and I am getting more pieces of evidence by the second. And we'll get into that here momentarily because I want to talk about, obviously, what these two gentlemen were discussing this afternoon and this evening. And it can be argued that Jay Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, and Joe Biden, the president of the United States, are the two most powerful men on the planet. And that statement, that could have been made for a long time, and it has been made for a long time, that the Fed chair and the president of the United States are the two most powerful people on the face of the earth. And there's even debate as to which individual is more powerful. Yes, the President of the United States is the commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful military, nuclear weapons, but guess what? Who finances all that stuff? That's right, the Federal Reserve. So it's a question and a matter of perspective. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't make that much of a difference, I guess, at the end of the day, but it's food for thought. So we'll get to market performance, we'll get to these comments, and that's going to be the bulk of today's conversation. So Jay Powell was out this afternoon, given the conclusion of the FOMC meeting today. And as was widely expected, the Federal Reserve did not change policy. So we are going to continue to have a federal funds rate at 0% to 25 basis points. Okay, so basically all-time record lows. We're going to maintain that. Even though, according to them, the Federal Reserve is seeing broad-based economic strength. There's still some slack in the labor force, but nonetheless, we are on the path to recovery. Oh, these people drive me crazy. But I do have to say, I am finally happy to hear some questions by a handful of journalists today in the Q&A session that were questions that I have been asking here on the Capital News. So either these people have stumbled upon the Capital News podcast, I hope that's the case, or they finally just come around to what we have been seeing here at the Capital News for over a year. So I'm happy that the questions are finally starting to be asked. But at this point, I don't think it's so much a question. As I've been saying, I wish these people would grow a pair of balls, but I just think it's more that it's just so obvious. It's just so in your face, the absurdity and the ridiculousness of it all, that they cannot not ask these type of questions because they are so simple. They are so commonsensical. It's just, what are you observing? And then what are they doing? And how do these things jive? And of course, the Fed is also going to remain committed to their quantitative easing policy of at least $120 billion per month of purchasing U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. And one of those questions that was asked this afternoon finally was by a gentleman from MarketWatch. And typically, if there is some sort of tough question, or at least one that's sort of dancing around being a tough question, it comes from this gentleman. His name eludes me right now, but he's from MarketWatch. And sometimes you'll get somebody from Bloomberg, too, who will push some buttons. And that was also the case today. But there were a few others as well. So it's nice to see that more are getting on the bandwagon of asking some basic questions. But they're tough questions. They don't need to be tough, but they're tough because the Federal Reserve is trapped. And because Jay Powell and company do not want to answer these most basic of questions. But one such question was in regards to the real estate market. So, you're going to remain committed to $120 billion per month. And the breakdown has typically been about $40 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities purchases per month. Okay, that's a lot of money, $40 billion. Even though we are in the land of trillions, $40 billion is still a ton of money. So how do you square this circle, Mr. Powell, of continuing to purchase $40 billion of MBS per month, yet at the same time, we are witnessing all-time high prices in the real estate market? And Jay Powell looked like a deer in the headlights. And he went back to 2008, 2009, the great financial crisis. That's how he started his answer. And that's pretty much where he left. He said, we started purchasing mortgage-backed securities back in 2009 because of the subprime crisis and the subsequent fallout, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we know that. We understand that. But when the subprime crisis was a crisis and home prices were imploding, you came in with this emergency policy because prices were collapsing. Prices are not collapsing today, yet you continue to purchase them. So if it was an emergency when prices were collapsing, how is it an emergency when prices are rising? And why do you continue to embark on this emergency policy? Well, he has no answer. This has been the point. This has been an argument that I have been making here since 2019. This was the first capital economics presentation that I did that is still up on thecapitalnews.com and can still be found on our YouTube channel under the Capital News as well. Are central banks trapped? Not just the Fed, central banks, and we looked at a handful of them in that presentation. That was 2 years ago. It was a question that I answered in that presentation that they were, and that was before COVID-19. That was before this pandemic, before these restrictions, before these lockdowns, before these massive supply chain disruptions, although we were embarking. There were also the existence of supply chain disruptions then because of the trade wars, which still continue to this day. They might not be as hot as they were under the Trump administration, but they're still in existence. And we still have massive supply chain disruptions. And as I have been stating to this audience, and I will continue to do so, we are in the midst of a triple whammy. The trade wars, the out-of-control fiscal policy, which created the Great Depression, the fascination, the obsession with the tech sector and with cryptocurrencies. These asset classes can only go up, reminiscent of the dot-com era, and now the great financial crisis, subprime, with real estate prices at all-time highs. Okay? This still has legs, as I stated yesterday, in my opinion. There is fundamental demand for some of this real estate. A lot of these homes are being purchased by pension funds, private equity, hedge funds. So a lot of this it's cash. They own it 100%. They got it. They got it. So it's not as much leverage as there was during the subprime crisis and that whole real estate quote-unquote boom, because at the time you had very low standards, hence subprime. You had ninja loans, no income, no job, no problem. If you can fog a mirror and you want a home, sign here. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you have a new home. Now, we don't have that, at least not to the degree that we had it a decade plus ago. But there are still some loose standards. But with the lack of supply on the market, with the fundamental demand for a lot of this real estate, and with the fact, again, leading to the supply constraint, builders can't keep up, you are going to have higher prices, just by the basic laws of economics, supply and demand. But with all of these extra liquidity injections, that's just fueling the fire. And of course, what happens in this process is it prices out perhaps a generation of home buyers or would-be home buyers. These are not young couples with $300,000, $400,000 in cash lying around buying these homes. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this one out. So when you have article after article from one news agency after the next coming out and saying that these are hedge funds and private equity and pension funds buying this real estate for cash, basically at any price, well, that makes more sense. They have the cash. They have the liquidity. They are being given this gift of liquidity from the Federal Reserve. They're buddies with the banks that give them the loans. Okay? That's it. It's how it works. Those closest to the printing press benefit from it the most and benefit from it first or earliest. This is not a hard equation to understand. And this is why we continue to see these massive gaps in wealth inequality, which again, with the intersection of economics, politics, and society and social issues, this is going to cause a massive problem. It already is. We were witnessing these things in 2019, again before the pandemic, because the global economy was weakening then. It got weaker in 2020, obviously, and it is still weak today. The Federal Reserve, and I have to say, with respect to that question, on real estate to Jay Powell, with these home prices being where they are, isn't this problematic to first-time home buyers? And I will give to his credit, he did admit that, yes, this is problematic to first-time home buyers, to those younger couples who are trying to buy their first home. So I'll give him credit for saying that. Finally, some truth out of this guy. But there wasn't really any pushing on a follow-up question, which would have been, well, don't you realize, Mr. Powell, that it's your policies that have led to these massive price increases? Don't you understand you're fueling this fire? Yeah, we understand people want to leave the cities. They want to go to the suburbs. Yes, there are some underlying supply and demand characteristics in this. That's always going to be the case. But to what degree are we witnessing these massive price increases? Who is purchasing these homes with all cash? Because we know it's not young people. We just know that's not the case. Even middle-aged individuals don't have this type of cash lying around. Okay, so this is somewhat a little scary too, because this kind of falls into the Great Reset, which is not conspiratorial. This has been broadcast on the mainstream media. This was discussed at length during the World Economic Forum. You have the founder of the World Economic Forum, the president, or whatever other title he wants to give himself, Klaus Schwab, stating that within this Great Reset, you will own nothing and you will like it. Do you like that statement? You will own nothing and you will like it. That is part of the Great Reset, whatever it means. It's vague, but that is something that comes out of it. You'll own nothing and you will like it. Well, people can't afford these homes. Who's buying them? Well, we know foreigners. We know these big institutions. Fantastic. Where are they getting the money? Well, from Uncle Sam and from a printing press. Now, with all of this miraculous and fantastic growth that is underway, of course, I'm being sarcastic here, but the Fed is now saying, well, this could start to lead to inflation. However, the Fed still maintains that they have the tools to combat inflation. They still remain convinced, or at least an argument in rhetoric, that it is going to be transitory. And their biggest argument as to why they believe it is going to be transitory is because of the base effects. So because of what took place last year, so much collapsed. Okay, so many things went down. All right, so now you got a very low level from last year of which you're basing your year-over-year comparisons. So it's not going to take that big of a jump to have a bigger year-over-year increase. Okay, that's part of the base effect. And of course, the base effect can work in the other direction as well. If you're something that shot up last year, this year, and it came down, that's significant as well. So it works in both directions. So the Federal Reserve is making the argument, well, because of these base effects, yes, inflation might look like it's running hotter than what it actually is. But because we believe that's going to be the case, we're not going to be concerned with inflation. So we don't care if your bills go up. We're not going to call that inflation. Okay, they're just going to completely ignore it. So evidently, that would mean to me, that would suggest that they are really going to have to wait until next year to make some sort of decision. So they're going to continue to just wait it out. And even if you see some sort of massive spike, they'll just attribute it to the base effect. Well, it's just the base effect. And they'll say that this is reminiscent, or indicative, I should say, of a growing economy, which is a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of phony baloney. If you truly had a strengthening economy, that would mean you have investment, capital expenditures. That means you have savings, you have capital formation. It means you have productivity. It means you have innovation. You have increases to productivity. That is a strong, vibrant, growing economy. That does not produce inflation, i.e. higher prices. Of course, we understand what true inflation is. It's an increase of the money supply. In a strong, vibrant economy, because of advancements in productivity and innovation, prices would actually come down because you are increasing the volume of goods and services, but you're also reducing your costs because you're becoming more productive. And if you're in a competitive landscape, then your end prices to your consumers are also going to fall down because you are competing for market share, and price is going to be one of those points on which you compete with your competitors. But you're still going to bring in margins, and you're going to be dealing with a stronger currency because you are in a stronger economy. These people have it completely ass backwards. So again, we are dealing with some serious jokers here. It's one thing to put up with and deal with their incompetence year after year, but now we are starting to have to deal with their arrogance too. And that becomes that 1-2 punch with their arrogance and incompetence. All right. So that was the main takeaway today from the Fed chair. An admission that the real estate market is pricing people out, and that's not a good thing. Didn't have a straight answer as to why they continue to purchase $40 billion per month in mortgage-backed securities. With no end in sight, they remain committed to this policy. He did admit that there is some frothiness within the markets. I mean, come on, it's been frothy. I mean, come on. The only time, look, one valuation metric after the next, you are going to some pretty dark periods in American economic history, even global economic history. Those are your reference points. And depending on the metric, this might be an all-time high. Okay, so things don't usually end well when you're at these types of valuations. Okay, because they simply make no sense. They are completely decoupled from the underlying economy from which they are supposed to base some semblance of reality. They're supposed to mirror this to some extent. We are completely decoupled, so we are in no man's land. And the only narrative that ultimately matters, as far as I'm concerned, is will the markets continue to buy the liquidity trade? If the answer is yes, then markets continue to go up. If the markets say enough's enough because of system exhaustion, whatever the case may be, then it's game, set, match. Because the Fed is not going to have any tools in their toolkit to combat some sort of sell-off, whether it be drastic or whether it be steady as she goes. The market's saying enough's enough, we can't take it. That's it. We are not there yet. We are not there yet because we have markets making all-time highs in the overnight session right now. So market performance, we have the dollar index at 90.54. So 90.54 with the dollar index down slightly overnight. Bitcoin is around $54,000 a coin. And several major currency pairs against the U.S. dollar are at several week highs against the greenback. Overnight futures trading, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 0.33%. The S&P 500 is putting on a gain of 0.6% to trade at 4,207 points. So breaching that 4,200 level. The NASDAQ 100 is up 0.9% overnight futures, trading at 14,027 points. Japanese cash trade up 0.2%, 29,000 points, so flirting again with that $30,000 level. A sea of green across the pond today in Europe. Cash trade in Australia putting on a gain of 0.25%. I think it's trading at about a 14-month high, so basically regaining all of its losses due to the pandemic and probably going to start making new highs. Chinese stocks are up 0.25% as well. Indian stocks are flat, and the reason, obviously, that I'm mentioning the Indian equity market is because of the massive crisis that we're told that the Indian people are dealing with respect to COVID-19, yet the market has been rebounding. So again, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are, what market. It's just decoupled from reality. On the commodity front, WTI $64.05 a barrel, Brent $67.47, so again flirting with that 70 handle and likely going to get there. Natural gas $2.94, so flirting with the 3 handle. Gasoline $2.07, gold and silver both up overnight. Gold $1,783 an ounce, silver up 0.7% to trade at $26.36. Copper also in the green, $4.54 a pound. And we talked about Chile and that strike with those miners down there, with obviously Chile being a massive copper producer. And they went on strike because the government at least was able to temporarily block individuals in Chile from tapping their pension funds in a bid to just make ends meet. They had done this twice before. They wanted to do it a third time. And now, across the news wires, it appears that the government was not able to block that. So the Chilean people are going to be able, for a third time, to tap their pensions. Now, this is not good for the long-term health, and their equity markets sold off as a result of this, because in order to redeem the cash, those pension funds are going to have to sell their stocks in the Chilean market to get the cash to give to these individuals. So there's no free lunch here, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't matter where you are. And Uncle Sam's 10-year junk note is yielding 1.62%. And this is something we also have to discuss here. Okay, not just the 10-year note, but Uncle Sam's debt in general here, right? Because our demented president, Joe Biden, wants to give away trillions and trillions of dollars. Already done so with the Democrats. Donald Trump and his Republican buddies gave away trillions of dollars when it was their turn, and now all of a sudden the conservatives have become fiscally responsible again. Leave these people. Leave them. They don't care about you. They just want to attempt to bribe you. Bribes work for them, so they think, well, it works for us. Maybe it'll work for the people, and then we'll get reelected. Stop falling for it. There is no free lunch. But what is going to become, in my opinion, extremely problematic is the amount of debt supply that Uncle Sam is going to have to throw out into the marketplace. So Treasury issuance. This stuff ain't free. Who's going to buy all of this up? We know foreigners do not have a huge appetite for it anymore because it's junk. And also because they have their own problems to contend with, and they're buying theirs up. So who's going to buy up all of this supply of treasuries? Because it's not just treasuries that you got to look at. What about the corporate market with all of the zombie corporations? There's only so much money circulating around the system. Who is going to win out here? Who is the Federal Reserve going to choose at the end of the day? And I argue it's going to be the government. Now, the Fed is going to buy up all of this. They are going to be the biggest purchaser of this massive supply of treasuries that's going to be coming over the market this year and next, and maybe the year after that as well, because there's no end in sight to all of this spending. And I don't care if the Republicans want to pretend to have grown a spine, grown a backbone, and want to now be the party of principle because they are the minority party. A lot of this stuff is still going to pass. It might not be with trillion-dollar price tags, they'll just make it smaller. 500 billion here, 600 billion there, 300 billion here, and before you know it, it's trillions of dollars, because we are in the era, we are in the time, we are in the land of trillions of dollars. $700 billion was an outrage a decade ago during the great financial crisis with TARP. Both parties were outraged by it. Now we throw around trillion like it's nothing. We have a larger deficit at 4 trillion and some odd change, 4.2, 4.3 trillion dollar deficit. Our deficit is larger than the amount of tax revenue that we bring in. Think about that for a second. Think about that. Okay? Nobody wants to have that conversation. We are spending $8 trillion a year. We did so last year, thereabouts. We're about to do so again this year, and we're likely going to do it for the foreseeable future. So we're going to have multi-trillion-dollar deficits moving forward. And if I'm not mistaken, the trade deficit for merchandise for the month of March also hit a new record of $90 billion. $90 billion. So we continue to have record monthly trade deficits. Fantastic. So much winning, I can't stand it. $8 trillion divided by 52 weeks comes out to about $154 billion a week that we are spending at the federal level. Not the state, not the local, just the federal. All right? $154 billion per week. These idiots in the Democrat Party can tax, not tax, they can confiscate 100% of Jeff Bezos' net worth. Not his income. His net worth. Everything the man owns. All of his stock, all of his real estate, all of his cash, everything he has. And it will operate the federal government for a week. The federal government can confiscate everything that Elon Musk owns. They can confiscate everything that Bill Gates owns, Warren Buffett. And you will operate our banana republic federal government for a month. So whenever these jokers get up and say, well, we're just going to increase taxes on people making $400,000 or more, and we're going to be able to pay for all these trillions of dollars, now you understand who's running the education system in this country too, don't you? Because the math just simply doesn't work. It doesn't work. And they want to increase spending. They don't want to cut spending. They want to increase it. So you're going to make the problem even worse. The only chance that you would get as to confiscating these people's wealth and for it to go even further is to say, well, we're in this liquidity loop. So perhaps with all of this extra liquidity going into the market, stocks take off even further, and these individuals, their net worth increases at a faster clip, and so we can take more of it, and then we'll finance everything. Instead of them financing things for a month, they'll finance things for 2 months, and aren't we better off? This is who's at the helm. It was not a good speech by Joe Biden. It was a piece of junk, just like most of those speeches are. Patting themselves on the back, saying everything's going to be better. Why didn't we do this 30 years ago? Yeah, Joe, you were there 30 years ago. Why didn't you do it 30 years ago? And why didn't so many other of those idiots in that chamber do it? Because they were all there, or a significant portion of them were there 30 years ago too. Why now? Why all of a sudden? And now we're supposed to trust you? You and all these other jokers in the Democrat and Republican parties who have been there for generations? Oh, yeah, now finally we're going to do it. We have a track record of not doing it, but now we're finally going to do it. How anybody believes these people, how anybody votes for them, is beyond me. I don't get it, but that's what they're going to do. And they come up with the other argument again. Healthcare is not a privilege, it is a right. No, that is incorrect. You do not have the right to somebody else's labor. That's what healthcare is. You go see a nurse, you go see a doctor, you go see a therapist. That is their labor. You do not have a right to their labor. That's called slavery. That ain't rights. These people don't understand what it is. I have the right to free speech. Does that mean the government is going to pay for me to go to a store and have a sign made so I can protest? Are they going to give me money so I can go to the gun store because I have the second to bear arms? No, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. And why do people want politicians involved in their health care? Isn't that extremely personal? I think it is. And do you honestly think that there's only ever going to be one party in power? So why do you want your health care to be a political football? Oh, the Democrats are in power now. Okay, we got it this way. Now the Republicans got in power because they didn't like it, and now they're going to go their way, and back and forth we go. Why do you want to be the monkey in the middle? Why do you want to be the idiot in the middle? Because that's what they're making of you. They're making you out to be a fool. They're making you out to be an idiot. You vote for them. You trust them time and time again. You have out-of-control deficits and out-of-control debt. No accountability, no responsibility. And you want to hand them everything. You want to give them all your data. You want to give them all of this power and all of this accusation. Can't figure it out. But this is why we have one problem after the next. I mean, the government wants to be in control, cradle to grave. I mean, now the talk is, well, baby steps, cradle to college, but we know it's cradle to grave because they have Social Security, they have Medicare. What do you call that? I mean, come on. Come on. And now it's all being pushed, or at least a portion of this multi-trillion-dollar spending is being pushed through the family package. It's all about the family. It's all about the family. This is code for dependence. This is code for universal basic income. This is the slow drip. This is the slow boil analogy. You don't throw the frog into a boiling pot of water, he jumps right out. But put him into a nice lukewarm bath, crank the heat up, and before you know it, you got a cooked frog. Or you can say this is the cattle that is being fatted before slaughter. Oh, look, guys, look how much the farmer loves us. Look how much food he's given us. Little do they know they're going to be led to slaughter in a week's time. This is getting people conditioned. This is getting younger people conditioned because it's all about the family. We want to give hundreds of dollars away per month per child. This is what we want to do. So now these younger kids are going to be conditioned if this goes through. Oh, look, the government gives us all this money. Look, isn't everything great and grand? And people are going to say, oh, yes, isn't this great? We get all of this money. You're being conditioned. The government doesn't have the money. If all of this stuff was great, if this was the solution, then why did it take mankind this long to figure it out? We've had a printing press for a long time. Other countries have had printing presses for a long time. If this was so great and grand, then why isn't Zimbabwe at the top of the pyramid? Why wasn't Weimar Germany at the top of the pyramid? Argentina, Turkey, Venezuela. Pick a country. It's because it doesn't work. You can kick the can down the road. You can put on a good smoke and mirror show, but it's only temporary. This is extremely reckless, extremely dangerous, and extremely criminal as far as I'm concerned, because it is stealing future growth and prosperity from younger generations who don't have much of a say in these policies. Because a lot of people aren't old enough to vote, and some people aren't even in existence yet, but they will have to pay for this. And a lot of the people who are passing these laws are going to be dead soon. They're 70s, 80s. They're not going to be around to deal with the consequences. I mean, this is beyond criminal. Our founding fathers have to be rolling over in their graves, as they say. I mean, we fought a revolution against the British for a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what we are living through today. This is an outrage. But hey, don't worry. You're going to get trillion-dollar giveaways. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.